Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile phones are turned to silent or switched off. Thank you. My name is Councillor Gary Thompson, and I'm the chair of this committee. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on Council's website to enable public viewing of the proceedings, including councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on Council's website as soon as practically possible after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if need be, the meeting will be postponed. I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers in attendance this evening. Seated to my immediate left, closest to me, Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Nick Stavrou, our Deputy Mayor Councillor Wes Galt, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, and opposite Councillor Hollingsworth, our Mayor Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Di Gillies, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Susan Bigger, Councillor Victor Franco. We also have a number of officers in attendance this evening. Situated behind Councillor Stavrou, we have our Chief Executive Officer, Mr Philip Storer. Seated to my immediate right, your left, is our Director of Urban Living, Mr Scott Walker. Seated to his right, your left, Mr David Cohen, Manager of Strategic and Statutory Planning. Seated to my left and your right, Mr Brian Wee, Manager of Governance and Legal. And situated to his left, Kirsten Ritchie, thank you, Governance Manager Officer. There are also a number of other officers in attendance this evening, and they'll present their reports as they are introduced. Essentially, the purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. The committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. Councillors are familiar with the reports, which include a summary of the objections received. For those of you in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to that agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. I will then call you up one by one to come forward and address the committee, seated at the end of the horseshoe table. If you're making a submission, please present your viewpoints precisely and clearly on why you support or oppose the officer's recommendation. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the submissions focused on relevant issues and issues not previously raised. If you are opposed to the planning application, please inform the committee as to why you oppose it and perhaps suggest an alternative approach which would satisfy your concerns. Please focus your concerns on matters rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. Please note that there is a strict time limit of 3 minutes for every speaker. Whilst I'm chairperson, I reserve the right to vary that. I seldom do. I'll ask speakers to sit at the end of the horseshoe table, and at the 2.5 minute mark, I'll make that noise indicating that you've got 30 seconds to conclude your presentation. We'll move on to apologies. Mr Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair, there are no apologies this evening.
Thank you. Item 1 of our agenda this evening is the minutes of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting held on the 19th of September 2022. Councillors, I'm in search of a motion to adopt the minutes. Councillor Sinfield?
So moved.
Thank you. And seconded, Councillor Addis? Is there any opposition to that? There being none, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Moving on to item 2, declaration of a conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Are there any conflicts of interest this evening? There being none, I note, Madam Mayor, your light's still on. Thank you. No conflicts this evening. Thank you, everyone. So we'll move into our first report this evening. Item 3.1, Harcourt Street Heritage Assessments, Smythdale Estate Precinct. Outcomes of the preliminary consultation and request for authorisation. This will be presented by Mr. Christian Wilmson, Senior Strategic Planner.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, councillors, residents. This report is to inform the committee of the outcomes of the preliminary consultation process for the Harcourt Street Heritage Assessment and the officer's response to the feedback received. The report seeks a resolution to commence the planning scheme amendment process to apply a permanent heritage overlay to the properties identified as part of the Smythdale Estate Precinct. Preliminary consultation was undertaken on the draft heritage citation for the Smythdale Estate Heritage Precinct and the individually significant property at 48 Harcourt Street from the 20th of May until the 24th of July 2022. 43 submissions were received in total. With 39 supporting, 2 partially supporting, and 2 opposing submissions. The key issues raised in the feedback include the support for heritage protection in general and for the nominated places specifically, support for the heritage overlay as a tool to limit redevelopment, the importance of Jessie Henderson to the Smythdale Estate Precinct, a submission that cautioned about applying the heritage overlay in the consideration of administrative burdens, property price impacts, and the perceived benefits to council staff, as well as disagreement with the heritage overlay recommended for 48 Harcourt Street. Officers and council's heritage consultant have reviewed the feedback with a summary and response provided at attachment 1 of the report in front of you tonight. Only minor changes are recommended to the precinct citation for the Smythdale Estate, and those are shown in attachment number 2. The other recommendation relates to number 48 Harcourt Street, where an opposing submission has uncovered new evidence to demonstrate in that the house has been significantly altered, based on a review by council's heritage consultant of the original plans of the house and plans showing the alterations undertaken in the early 2000s. The heritage consultant have changed their recommendation and are no longer recommending for the site to be protected through the heritage overlay, as it has not met the threshold for inclusion in the overlay any longer. Since the completion of the report, officers have also received further correspondence from the owner of 48 Harcourt Street that's not reflected in the body of the report, and it's not discussed in there. Councillors, you'd be aware that that has been circulated to you. What's in that further submission has had no impact on the officer recommendation here tonight. As such, officers recommend the adoption of the heritage citation for the Smythdale Estate Precinct and to seek a resolution to write to the Minister for Planning to seek authorisation to commence the amendment process. Once authorisation is received, the amendment process will commence, and that includes exhibition of the proposed precinct with further opportunity for affected owners to make submissions to council and to have those considered by an independent planning panel. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We'll turn to presentations from our gallery. We have 3 speakers this evening, 2 for the officer's recommendation and 1 against. Our first speaker, Ms. Christina Brannigan. Are you here, Ms. Brannigan? No? I've been asked to read her presentation out, filled out a form. So I'll read that out very briefly, and then I'll ask our next presenter, Ms. Nerida Muirden, to come forward. So this is Ms. Brannigan's presentation. Good evening, councillors and officers. I live in Camberwell and know Harcourt Street well. I'd like to speak in very strong support of the recommendation to council by the officers to create a new Smythdale precinct. I'd like to thank Councillor Sinfield in particular for her support for the study to be undertaken, and the officers and the heritage consultants who have undertaken the work and produced such a detailed and interesting study that increases the community's understanding of the history and the architecture of the area. The houses include wonderful examples of 19th century heritage architecture, and their inclusion in the heritage overlay in this area will complete the protection of an important section of Harcourt Street and Carlisle, which to date have been excluded. As officers have explained, this was a community nomination in early 2021, only 3 or so years after the Hawthorn East Gap study has been undertaken, and so this potential precinct was missed at that time. Just 5 or so places were nominated by the community, and we see in the study that the heritage consultant found another 5 around the corner. It's a great example of how community and council can collaborate on heritage nomination for the common benefit of our heritage. As some councillors may be aware, the newfound precinct is also a very good example for councillors of a community nomination that would not have ordinarily been allowed under the nomination process as been recently suggested. This is because the area was, in theory, included in the 2017-18 Hawthorn East Gap study only 3 years prior. And because the heritage criteria that the residents used were basically criterion D and E, however, we can see that places do get missed in the large studies, and this is councillor input is important. In this case, the nomination would not have been considered. Thankfully, we now have the evidence we need. I ask councillors to agree tonight to move to a community consultation phase so that these significant places can be considered more formally for protection. Thank you. So our next speaker, if we can come forward, is Ms Nerida Muirden. Thank you. And Ms Muirden, if I can just ask that you pull that speaker nice and close to you and just press the button. The button's on now, which is good.
Yep.
And if we can commence with your name and your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Actually, could I just ask Kirsten if she could pop up
Here we go.
a photo? Thank you. Thanks so much. My name is Nerida Muirden and I live in Camberwell. Hello councillors and officers, thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. Up on the screen are some photos. These photos are houses, some of the houses in the study, and look at them, aren't they beautiful? I want to thank councillors and council officers for all the hard work in doing the heritage assessment study for Harcourt and Carlisle Street, Hawthorn East. I'm really pleased to support the officers' recommendation to start the process of protecting these 10 Victorian houses and create the Smythesdale precinct. The houses in the study are clearly Victorian and contribute to the local neighbourhood character. These houses were built in the 1880s and 1890s and are intact, well built, have lovely gardens and are important to the community. In particular, it was very interesting reading the officers' report about the proposed significant grading for 89 Harcourt Street. Harcourt Street is a historic tree-lined street with a mix of architecture styles, showing how it has developed over the years and has the most incredible Victorian mansions that have stood the test of time. It is great to see council looking at protecting more houses at the Burke Road section of Harcourt Street. This proposed section is next to an existing precinct too. The proposed section, however, was missed during the recent Hawthorn East Gap study and came to council's attention by community nomination. It is great to see council and the community working together to try and protect these heritage places. It is a good start. However, this community nomination would not be allowed under the proposed nomination process. There shouldn't be a set time frame before which the community can nominate, as there are too many inconsistencies in this process to be sure a heritage place is not missed. Councillors should also be able to have their input too. I thank council's ongoing interest in heritage identification and protection and ask council to continue to look at the protection of other houses on Harcourt and Carlisle Street so they too can be celebrated by the community and can be enjoyed by future generations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms Muirden, for your presentation. Councillors, any questions of Ms Muirden? There appears to be none. Thank you for your presentation this evening.
Thanks very much.
Our last speaker this evening is Ms Mary Drost. If you can come forward, Ms Drost. Thank you, Ms Drost. If we can just commence with your name and your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Is it on? Yes.
All good.
Yes, Mary Drost, and I live in Prospect Hill Road, Camberwell. And I sat here where you're sitting long ago, okay. And I'm the one who actually brought in the original heritage areas in the area, all right? And I'm very keen on protecting it. And I think that this should be protected too. It mightn't be perfect heritage, but I think we've got to protect the whole area from modernisation, destruction. What I say is, try that in Paris, you'd be sent straight to the guillotine. They protect it. And I think we should be protecting these wonderful areas as well, these lovely heritage houses that we've got. Don't let the developers make money out of destroying them. Let's protect this wonderful area we've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Drost. There appear to be no questions. Thank you for your presentation. Mr Wilmson, matters arising.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Chair. It's probably not too much to respond to, noting the supporting submissions from the community members tonight. We're obviously not here to discuss the community heritage nomination process. I did want to make the comment, though, that previous assessments in looking at this area were focused on 89 Harcourt Street and another individual place in Carlisle Street. So the assessments that were previously undertaken focused on individual significance of individual properties. There was not a precinct identified through the gap study. So from a community heritage nomination process that was recently presented to Council, the precinct as such would still qualify for investigation under the nomination process. I just wanted to clarify that there's a misunderstanding to the extent of what this precinct would have been allowed if a community nomination process were to be adopted by Council. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr Wilmson. Councillors, questions of officers? Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. In looking at the gradings map currently on the Council website dated 22 August 2022, none of these properties are shaded yellow as under review. I'm just wondering if officers might be able to provide some insight as to their current status, if that should be perhaps an error, or I don't know.
Thank you. They wouldn't be included in the gradings map because they're not in a heritage overlay. The gradings map only covers properties that are subject to a heritage overlay. These properties are not subject to a heritage overlay. If they were to go into an interim heritage overlay or into a permanent heritage overlay, that's when the gradings map would be updated to reflect that. But properties that are not in the heritage overlay, even if they're under investigation, they're not subject to that map or are not covered by that map.
Follow up, if I may. So the report says that they will be, as soon as they're identified, they're added to the possible heritage layer, but that's not the GIS layer with the yellow shading classified as under review.
Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillors, any further questions of officers? There appears to be none, so I'm in search of a motion. Councillor Sinfield.
The officer's recommendation, please.
Thank you. And I have a second to Councillor Hollingsworth.
Yeah.
Fantastic. To assist Councillor Sinfield, is there any opposition? There appears to be no opposition on this. Councillor Sinfield, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you. I will briefly. I'm very pleased that there's no opposition to this, and nor should there be. This is an exciting step forward for Burundara in identifying another small parcel, a small precinct of properties to commence this process to protect them for future generations to enjoy. I thank the community members who have nominated and made submissions on various different properties that are referenced in the report here, because without their eyes and ears on the ground and those submissions coming through and their try and make sure I say this in the most polite and right way possible, but without constantly keeping heritage front of mind, properties like this could very well be overlooked and not receive the attention that they deserve. So in the nicest possible way, thank you for keeping heritage front of mind for us. The properties that are listed here, excluding 48 Harcourt Street, which is excised from the report, are all very much worthy of protection. But I do ask officers if they could perhaps tomorrow pay particular attention to 14 and 16 Carlisle Street, which appear to have building works on site at present, as of today, and perhaps some engagement with those property owners might be required at the earliest opportunity, if officers might be able to look after that tomorrow. So I commend this motion to you all and thank you for your support.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. As there's no opposition, I'll put this motion to the vote. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to item 3.2. 65 Kooyonkoot Road, Hawthorn, 2 dwellings on a lot. And this will be introduced by Ms Amaya De Silva, Senior Statutory Planner.
Through you, Mr Chair, UPDC item 3.2 is for a planning permit application for the construction of 2 dwellings on a lot at 65 Kooyonkoot Road in Hawthorn. It is noted the applicant has lodged a review at the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal on the basis that a decision has not been made within the statutory timeframe. Although an application for review has been lodged, Council must still determine whether the matter and form a view on whether the proposal is supported or not. The position reached will then be presented at VCAT for a determination. All objectors will have the right to be a party to the VCAT hearing. The proposal includes the construction of 2 side-by-side attached double-storey dwellings with a combined basement, which comprises of a minimum of 2 car spaces per dwelling. The application was referred to internal departments, all which supported the application subject to conditions. The key issues raised and addressed during the assessment include neighbourhood character, compliance with Res Code, and the objections received. Overall, the proposal achieves a high level of compliance with the requirements of the Neighbourhood Residential Zone and Clause 55, also known as Res Code, of the Burundara Planning Scheme. The proposal is consistent with the objectives outlined in the Burundara Planning Scheme and the objectives detailed in the Neighbourhood Character Precinct Statement applicable to this site. Kooyonkoot Road has a robust streetscape with a varied character in terms of design, bulk and form of dwellings. Multiple dwellings in the street include large flat-roofed buildings with basements and high fencing. While architecturally contemporary in style, the proposed design and materials are respectful of the neighbourhood character along Kooyonkoot Road and surrounding streets. It is therefore recommended the Urban Planning Delegated Committee resolve to support planning permit application PP 22/0002 for the construction of 2 dwellings on a lot at 65 Kooyonkoot Road, subject to the conditions included in the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr De Silva. Councillors, we have 4 presenters this evening, 2 for and 2 against. I'll bring forward our first speaker speaking against the officer's recommendation. Miss Mary Drost, if you can come forward again, thank you. And followed by Mr Young after Ms Drost has completed her presentation. Thank you, Mrs Drost. If you can, we'll just turn on your microphone. Here we go. Fantastic. Commence with your name and your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Mary Drost, Prospect Hill Road, Camberwell. And I'm quite disappointed that this is being recommended. You know, Kooyonkoot Road's a lovely heritage street too, and should be protected. I'd be saying absolutely no to what they want to do there. And, you know, it's going to ruin that street, I tell you. It's very disappointing that the council are approving, you know, to damage that lovely Kooyong Road so much. Anyway, I suppose that's inevitable, isn't it, with the developers destroying our area so they can build more.
Thank you, Mrs. Dross, for your presentation this evening. Our next presenter, Mr. Young, if you can come forward, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Young. If we can commence with your name and your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
My name is Neil Young. I reside at 48 Kooyong Road, diagonally opposite this property. I have 4 points really to make. The first is to note that the objection process has already delivered improvements. These plans have been very significantly amended, including increasing setbacks and reducing heights. Secondly, though, the plans can be improved further because as they stand, they do not comply with the objectives of the planning scheme or certain elements of it. This area is an area that has a character involving, and I quote, detached, spacious, suburban character, including garden settings and low site coverage. 2 dwellings on a block in Kooyong Road, including in this part of Kooyong Road, is totally out of character with the neighbourhood. That's the fundamental vice. What it produces is a building of enormous mass, hard up against the neighbouring properties. The setbacks are only 1.2 metres to the north and 1.8 metres to the south. Now that scrapes within the Res Code minimum requirements, but they are only minimum requirements which must give way to the character of the neighbourhood and the objectives of the planning scheme. So respectfully, the bulk of the building is too great. It's inconsistent with the neighbourhood development. It presents itself as a building of great mass to the street, which is out of character with the neighbourhood. The next point is this. There is currently in the plans a central dividing fence at the front. That has a height of 1.8 metres, according to the recommendation that that be imposed as a limit. Currently, it's a greater height than that. But the building presents as 2 separate adjoining buildings, contrary to the design objective of this part of the code, which reads to the effect that they are to present themselves as a single dwelling. I think I'll stop there. They are the points I wish to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Before you leave, councillors, any questions for Mr. Young? There being none, thank you for your... Councillor Park, thank you.
Yes.
I noted what you said in your first point, and that's one of my concerns about if this is refused, then what's been gained there might be lost. If there were to be an approval, do you have any suggestions about further conditions that aren't put forward by the officers?
Yes. Implicit in what I said are 2 further conditions. One, the setback should be greater than the 1.2 and 1.8 currently operating on the north and south boundaries. And secondly, if the bulk of the building can be reduced in some fashion so it's more consistent with the single detached family dwellings that you see in the street, that would also be an appropriate condition. That second condition is hard to phrase because it's really a design issue rather than the imposition of some strict limit. And the third condition is eliminating that central dividing fence, because from the street, a 1.8 metre high fence between the two parts of the allotment immediately breaks up the block, and you're looking at effectively at two flats. And that's really quite out of character with the neighbourhood.
Would you suggest that, in respect of the fence, a condition that permitted it to remain but at a lower height would be acceptable?
Well,
if so, at what height?
Well, I'm not sure it's a question of height. I'm not sure why there needs to be a fence. Yes, there are two front doors, but the front yards are mostly to preserve the streetscape and a front garden. They're not like they are private usable garden spaces. So I'm not sure there should be a dividing line between running right down the middle of the property, separating effectively the two pathways.
Final question, if I might.
Yes.
The setback issue, you acknowledge that it falls within res code.
I haven't done all the calculations, Councillor Park, but the calculations at page 51 suggests that it does.
Yes. That probably presents for us a problem unless, you've got any further thoughts to add. I heard what you said about it's the minimum, but nonetheless, it's often a situation where VCAT heartily adopts that minimum.
Yes, but it is in the character of two lots on a single site, inconsistently with the character of the neighbourhood. And so to apply those minimum setbacks as if they were determinative of the application, I would think is wrong. It's the objective of the neighbourhood character which is the governing consideration.
Thank you.
Even that section of the code starts off by saying that you look first at applying this objective of preservation of the neighbourhood character.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Park, and thank you, Mr Young, for your presentation this evening.
Sorry, can I?
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. Councillor Franco's.
Can I?
Yes.
Just a further question sparked by Councillor Park's questioning. Look, I'll probably ask this question of officers if they don't answer it anyway, but if you don't know the answer, that's fine. But under the neighbourhood character, is there a test somewhere that requires the property to read as a single property? And if so, can you point to that?
There is. It's quoted in the report at... Let's see if I can find it.
Councillor Franco, are you happy for officers to address that?
The top of page 13 of the report, third bullet point.
Mr Young, to say thank you for identifying where that is. We might even get the officers to present that to Councillor Franco's question shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Young, for your presentation. Our next presenter this evening, Miss Elisa Wilslow, Miss Wilslow, and followed by Mr Chris Lintello. Thank you. Miss Wilslow, if we can commence with your name and your suburb and your 3-minute presentation.
Is the light still on?
That is, thank you.
Right. Hi, I'm Ailsa Wilson, and I'm also a neighbour in Kooyonkoot. And I'm not sure whether I filled out the form correctly, but a number of the neighbours have been concerned and have put in objections, and the others weren't able to come tonight. But, and Mr Young has outlined the key issues, but the neighbours do care about these things, and we do see it as a leafy garden neighbourhood that's a characteristic that everybody identifies with strongly, that everybody thinks is important. And I guess the way we see it, it's about the percentage of the block that feels like it is a garden and that has trees and green space. And these days, I guess we understand these are links, important links for birds, for insects, for bees. It's really not just about what looks nice to us. It provides shade. It creates a better environment for all of us. And obviously a lot of work's been done here, and I think the neighbours will appreciate all the work that the council team have done to get to where we've got, and that there have been changes which are very encouraging. And I must say, I took the time to read through the details, and it was very reassuring to read the arborist report and to see the 3 mature trees on the block that have been identified. Equally, it was very reassuring to go through the detail of the tree protection zones and the structural roofs protection zones. And I say that because what I hear neighbours say is, it's one thing to get trees protected, but what will happen during the building process, and will the roots be damaged? So it was actually very reassuring to read the large area of soil and space that is reserved. And so I wanted to commend council for doing that and making that available to reassure people, because neighbours are often just trying to do the best they can. And we're very pleased to see that there has been some setbacks, so there will be two trees in the front, one on each side, and a larger one at the back. But yeah, neighbours, we're just thinking about the environment and a concern that it's one thing for people to want to fit in and live somewhere, but is this just about developers trying to squeeze as much as they can out of a block?
Thank you for your presentation. I do apologise, Ms Wilson. Your N looked like a W, so...
Oh, that's fine.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? There being none, you may return back to the gallery. Thank you. Our last speaker this evening is Mr T. Lintello. Mr T. Lintello, if we can commence with your name and whether you're representing a company.
Good evening, councillors. My name's Chris Talentolo, and I'm representing the applicant, Jordan Lee.
Thank you.
My client and his family have been residents of the City of Burundara for more than 30 years. They're not property developers and they're part of the community. The reason why they've embarked on this course is to create multi-generational housing for their family. It's not a development in that context. Jordan intends to live with his wife and children in one of the houses, and his parents intend to live in the other house, being 3 generations of a family on the one property. This should be achievable on a site of 1,000 square metres, more than 1,000 square metres. It's not an insignificant property to work with. I guess we weren't really surprised to receive objections. Change of this nature is sometimes difficult. And seeing that most of the change that's occurred has been in large contemporary homes and not so much in the multi-dwelling space, we thought that might be a little bit of a challenge. But what we did was focus on the people immediately around us with their specific amenity concerns. So when the objections were received, I was asked to contact the neighbours, particularly to the north and the east, because their concerns were specifically about overlooking issues. We sat with each of them and worked through, and they're not here this evening, which is a testament to the work we did. We worked through their specific concerns because my client's going to become a neighbour of these people. He's not just a person coming in to build this and leave. This approach wasn't about removing objections. We genuinely respect people's right to object to a proposal. It was actually more about engaging with the views that they expressed and seeing if we could improve what we were doing. So it was a constructive process. I got to know both of them well, so I can refer to them by name if that's okay. Hazel Nicholson to the east and Peter Rickard to the north raised specific privacy issues. And to this end, Hazel even provided a letter to us supporting the application in the end, subject to us submitting amended plans, which we subsequently did. We also agreed to make the changes to Peter Rickard relating to building height, specifically, and some additional screening. And the property to the south is unoccupied, but they still had some concerns in the objections from the children about presentation of form. So we proposed further changes to that elevation as well to improve the application. Regardless of the status of the objections, we lodged amended plans in June incorporating these changes. And that included a revised front elevation, reducing the bulk and reducing the presentation of the building to the street. But it does present as one dwelling, not as two dwellings. Since then, we've also asked the council officer to add a condition relating to an air conditioning unit because Peter was specifically concerned about that. So to give him some confidence, we did that.
If I can just close off your presentation, a couple of sentences, please.
I'll jump to the conclusion. We submit that there is no substantive flaw in this application. A lot of work has been done that should result in it being approved, and we ask that you support this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we do have a few questions. Councillor Park, followed by Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. You've presented really to the effect that the applicant was keen to work with the process and the neighbours. Against that backdrop, whilst nothing much turns on it, I'm intrigued why, despite being aware that council officers had made their assessment and that the decision was pending, the applicant saw fit to race off to VCAT.
It's an excellent question, Councillor. One of the objectors, and that was Peter Rickard, made it clear to me at the very beginning of the process that he intended to take this application to VCAT. We've done a lot of work with him, and even post-lodging that application, and clearly he's not here this evening as a result of that. But the decision to lodge that was on the basis that we expected that he was going to take us there anyway. So if we can resolve this, the conditions as proposed by the officer, including reducing the height of the dividing fence and so forth, would result in a good outcome.
Then my next question relates to that dividing fence. You've had the benefit of hearing other submitters and the suggestion that that fence ought not be there. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's problematic on its own, but the officer report recommends reducing the height of that fence.
Yeah, I've read the officer's report, but it's a different question.
And I think that if it was a transparent fence, it would be less visible in its entirety. But the separation of those two front yards, once there's a front fence, would seem a reasonable outcome.
Given the use to which you've described the property is intended to be put, would a fence actually be required there?
I can't answer the question. I'm sorry. The application has a fence and I've been asked to pursue a fence. I can't answer the question as to whether it's necessary or not.
Right. It's not because my question's unclear. I can rephrase it, but you mean you just don't have instructions?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Watson.
Councillor Park actually covered the question that I wanted to ask, which was the response to the concerns over the fence. So I have no further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. My query, I think you might have implied this, but is your applicant comfortable with what the officers are recommending?
The applicant's comfortable with the officer's report, yes, and the conditions contained in there.
Thank you very much.
I might just touch on, thank you, Councillor Addis, touch on a question from Councillor Park. Bamboozles me why you've and your applicant has chosen to go to VCAT, if you're actually supportive of the officer's recommendation, would it not actually be better for the residents to take council to VCAT rather than the residents to take the applicant to VCAT? Can you answer that?
At the time of lodging the appeal, we hadn't seen the officer report. We weren't aware of the recommendation. It was a very short period in between, but it was literally at that period of time. So in hindsight, it would be a question I'd rather not be answering this evening. And we shouldn't have lodged, I agree.
Another question then. Could you foreshadow that you would withdraw your application to VCAT, subject to tonight's decision?
Certainly, if the council was to support the application, it would then only become dependent on whether residents decided to become a party to that. But assuming that residents didn't become involved in the VCAT process, then I think we'd be more than comfortable to work with council through that.
I know our officers want to jump in, but obviously it's questions at the moment. We'll come to matters arising shortly. Notwithstanding, all third-party appeal rights still extend to residents as well. So thank you for your presentation. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. My question is almost identical to yours, and you've taken the words from me, but if I might just ask how committed the applicant is to pursuing a hearing at VCAT, would a negotiated outcome tonight likely be satisfactory and see that application withdrawn?
The applicant isn't keen to go to VCAT at all. It's not their goal, and we don't appear to have, between the officer report and the applicant, a divergence of views. So I don't think anybody sees the reason to go to VCAT.
Sorry, if I might, just a follow-up. Who lodged the application at VCAT?
We did.
Thank you. Nothing further.
That appears to exhaust questions. Thank you for your presentation this evening. We will turn to matters arising, noting that there was a question from Councillor Franco already foreshadowed.
Through yourself, Mr. Chair, I might just clarify the position in regard to VCAT now that this matter has proceeded to VCAT. So it would not be a simple matter of council forming a position tonight and the applicant withdrawing that at VCAT and it converting automatically to a notice of decision to grant a permit. Now that the matter is in VCAT's hands, VCAT will need to issue the order for a decision. So that isn't a simple matter of the applicant withdrawing and this converts. Having said that, there are probably a couple of options in moving forward, and certainly it would be open to the applicant to indicate their support at VCAT to the council position should it support the officer recommendation this evening, and certainly no doubt the applicant's position would be determined based on whether there is a further party that wishes to pursue the matter at VCAT. So ultimately what we're dealing with here is VCAT making the decision, given that it's now in VCAT hands. It is not a council-controlled matter. I'll hand over now to Mr. Silva to deal with the other matters arising.
I might just add that there's always the option at VCAT. There's a few different things that can happen. So prior to going to a hearing, we're always able to consent if there are no other parties and the applicant's happy to consent to the same conditions, or if we add some conditions today, those things can be added at the VCAT process. So say there was something to do with the central dividing fence, we're always able to add that during the VCAT process. You know, even if it wasn't added today, we're not able to add anything because this isn't making a decision tonight. It's something that could be considered as part of the VCAT process. And with respect to some of the matters arising this evening, I'd like to note that Neighbourhood Character Precinct 51 is described under the study that was done by Council about 5 or 6 years ago as an area with a variety of building styles and eras, predominantly 2-storey dwellings, with some 3-storey dwellings clustered around Fairview Avenue, which is a few streets away. Moderate to generous lot frontages, medium to high front fences, front setbacks between 5 to 9 metres, and gardens are well vegetated with leafy green character. The proposed development has been designed to consider the predominant scale and contemporary nature of the surrounding dwellings, including the flat roof forms, modular designs and basements. With respect to the matter in relation to 2-storey scale and streetscape rhythm, so that the appearing as 1 or 2 dwellings in the street, I can't remember who asked, but yes, there is an objective in the precinct statement that seeks to maintain the 2-storey scale and ensure the building doesn't disrupt the streetscape rhythm. Now, the dwellings have been designed to appear as 1 dwelling from the street, and this is by the asymmetry of the dwellings. The front fence has been designed to not have 2 directly adjacent front gates. There's only a single basement rather than 2 driveways, and the articulation of the building doesn't allow it to appear like 2 separate dwellings. With respect to matters in relation to overdevelopment, the proposal satisfies the requirements within Res Code with respect to site coverage, setbacks, permeability, car parking and open space provision, and therefore it is not considered to be an overdevelopment of the site. It's noted that the existing dwelling actually has more site coverage than the proposed 2 dwellings. Furthermore, the dwelling density itself is not a relevant consideration for this application. However, the internal amenity of the dwellings has been considered acceptable, and there is limited off-site amenity impacts, and it suggests that the application hasn't attempted to squeeze more than too many dwellings on this particular land. There were some concerns in relation to visual bulk and inadequate setbacks from the side. It's noted that the existing dwelling has a setback of 1.8 metres from the northern boundary and no setbacks from the southern boundary when viewed from the street. So the garage is along the boundary. Furthermore, the proposal complies with the requirements of Res Code, including side and rear setbacks, north-facing windows and daylight to existing windows. So Res Code considers closely what setbacks are required and that impact to neighbouring properties with respect to their amenity. It's also noted that the design response has ensured that where adjacent to sensitive interfaces, sufficient setbacks or no built form has been cited, particularly at first floor, which is the most visible. So you may have seen that towards the northern side of the building, the design has been carefully considered to minimise impacts to the secluded private open space of number 63 Kuyonkoot Road. There was a matter that was raised in relation to the loss of trees. I'd like to just clarify that there are no significant trees on site. So the 3 trees that have been considered are 2 street trees and 1 tree at number 63 Kuyonkoot Road, but this is over 10 metres away from the boundary. The council's arborist has also assessed the application and has no objection given the minimised impact from the development. It's also noted that the proposal will include several more canopy trees than there are on site currently, and the deletion, obviously they've removed the pool, and within the front setback the driveway is only a single driveway rather than the double driveway that's there now, and that will allow for more planting within the front. And the last matter is that there was a concern about the heritage overlay. It's noted that this area does not have a heritage overlay. There are some individually significant properties on the other side of Kooyonkert Road, but there are no properties within the immediate vicinity of this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Silva, for your response to presentations. We do have a few questions from councillors. We've got Councillor Hollingsworth, followed by Councillor Bigger and Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Silva, thank you for answering that in such great detail, and in case I don't get the opportunity later, thank you for the way the report is presented as well. It's very easy to see your notations. Very well done, thank you. I noted that there is a condition to increase the single width double garage, but also to increase or to include storage in the basement. So I just wanted to ask you how that will actually impact. For example, it's demonstrated that it may accommodate up to 4 cars in the larger dwelling, and there isn't any storage in there as such at the moment. So is it likely to reduce at least the capacity of 1 vehicle by doing this?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Hollingsworth. The change in the basement driveway, so currently there is a basement ramp width of 3.4 metres, and that has been required to be increased to 3.6 metres wall to wall. So that's so that a car can get through easily, especially in a base with the basement construction. This is unlikely to impact any of the planting or planting areas within the front setback. The condition in relation to the storage, it's written in a way to be a little bit more specific. It's actually asked for the total size of the storage to be detailed on the plan. So there are areas that have been detailed as being storage, but to make sure that at least 6 cubic metres has been provided in accordance with the standard, I've asked for that notation to be provided, so the exact size. So I can see that there is, and it's likely that they'd be able to provide it without increasing the building footprint or impacting any of the car spaces, but I'd just like that size to be detailed on the plans.
Thank you, appreciate that. And sorry, just one more question. So with the, I believe it was the air conditioning unit going down into the basement as well, obviously that can all be accommodated without impact. And sorry, just one final question. If the applicant does proceed to go to VCAT, as it's been explained, that now that that's been scheduled, there is a procedural course that will take place. Could the applicant then not necessarily comply with what the decision of council is? Would it give the applicant the capacity to say, well, look, even though this was supported by council, we actually want to proceed with the original documents? Because the application has been formally amended during the planning process, these are the plans that we've currently got to, will be taken to VCAT. Yeah. If they choose to do some amended plans during VCAT, and there was the instance that it had more of an amenity impact, particularly on neighbours, decreased setbacks, increased in building heights, it's likely that it would be re-advertised. So they do have that opportunity. However, we would have to reassess that at the time, and we'd probably have the same concerns that we had originally. So. Right. So it would come back to council to re-advertise. It wouldn't come back to council. Well, it would come to the planning officers to be considered. Yes, and it would likely to be advertised to the neighbours again if that was the case. Yeah, thank you for clarification.
Mr Walker, I had some comments.
Yeah, I might just add through yourself, Chair, just an additional point of clarity. Any additional conditions or requirements to be added or changed to the plans beyond those that have already been submitted as a change, any of those that are added or included would be open to being challenged by the applicant should they choose to, despite the decision this evening.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. I've got Councillor Bigger and Councillor Franco, your light's off now. Happy with the response to your neighbourhood character comments? Fantastic. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, thank you. have a couple of questions, and I'd like to foreshadow a motion. Just one of the, some residents have raised with me concerns about, in looking at the report, about whether or not we're sort of cherry picking in our, for instance, our photo selection of the houses that we have included, understanding that we can't kind of take a picture of every single house on the street. But is it officers' view that the entire, that the street has largely transitioned, or are there parts of the street that you'd say are still, you know, not moved to this more modern configuration?
As you probably know, Councillor Bigard, the street is quite long, and there's it's formed in a hill, so you can definitely see that on one side of Kyungkoot Road. If you're looking on a map, it looks pretty flat, but when you're out on the street, there's definitely a different character from one side of Kyungkoot Road to the other side where this particular subject site is. Towards the north, there is, I think there are about 4 significantly graded dwellings, and you can say that, yep, that definitely forms part of the character in that area. Nevertheless, we have done a study and we found that that area, even though it has those 4 or 5 properties that have that heritage appearance, it's not enough to form a precinct, and that's because there's still, I think, 3 sets of unit developments in that area, including multi-storey buildings. And that's the more traditional side. When you come over to the opposite side, to the southern side of Kyungkoot Road, the area has definitely transitioned, and it's reflected in our neighbourhood character precinct statement, which identifies that the houses aren't the same as the ones in the north. They are larger, they are more modular in design, they include basements and high front fences, and we have recognised that, you know, 7 or 8 years ago, and we haven't changed our position on that in the reviews that we've done, and you know, it's very obvious when you are out on site, particularly on the southern side where this subject site is.
Thank you. Can I continue? Yeah, I wasn't necessarily suggesting it as a precinct in terms of a heritage overlay, but more the sense of the character of the area. And just on that note, though, on page 16, excuse me, of the report, the top of the page, there's a 16 of 56 at the top of the page. There's sort of a grade, or 22 of 97, sorry if that's clear for people. There's kind of a grade picture. And when I look at that, I guess I had a question about how which was showing the extent of built form of the subject site and neighboring sites. And to me, I look at that and that still looks like that this proposed development would actually be a jump in that extension of built form. And I guess I'm just wondering, how are you using a picture like that to justify that this is already the size that fits in the neighbourhood?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood. Are you asking whether you think with this particular render in comparison to the houses that we've seen is accurate? Is that what you're asking?
It's not the render, it's not the picture at the bottom of that page, it's the picture at the top of the page.
Oh, yes.
Which it seems to me that we're using that picture, I don't know if we can show that picture, we may not have it here, but it seems to me we're using that picture to show why, how this is actually, you know, similar to scale or to scope of what we're already seeing on the street. And yet I look at that and it doesn't seem to...
Is that the aerial view?
The aerial view at the top of page... It's either 22 of 97? If that's the page numbers.
I think it might be 123 is what the number that it comes with.
120.
Yeah, so that image is more for information to show what the existing built form is.
Yeah, that's it at the top.
Yeah, that's it. So that's to show that the 2 dwellings that are proposed, or this particular, the image that's shown now shows the built form of the existing dwelling. So that's not the proposed dwelling, that's what's on site currently. So that's just to show that what's going to be proposed will sit comfortably in that area because it will replace that existing built form on site. I've highlighted the others as well just to show you other areas in
other built form, but it's more of information for information purposes.
If I can have a follow-on question about that, then should that be impacting the decision that we make in terms of what is there currently? Is that set the standard for what we're going to replace it with? Meaning that don't we need to be thinking about it more broadly than what is currently sitting on that property, but how it still fits into the whole neighborhood character, regardless of what, it might have been a complete aberration, what happened to be there previously? Is that...
That is part of the consideration, and site coverage is only one part of a lot of the things that we consider. The applicant's obviously chosen to consider the existing footprint to minimise impacts on neighbours. So when a new building is built, they're trying to minimise that impact by having a similar built form to what's there. But in terms of neighbourhood character, there are a lot of other things that we consider as well, but this is just one part of it. Did you have anything else to add?
No, through yourself, Chair. Look, that's quite an appropriate answer. It's a matter of weighing up these two things. It's not simply a matter of mirroring the same footprint is acceptable. Yes, we need to test against neighbourhood character, and is this a good outcome and an acceptable outcome from a neighbourhood character perspective? But the existing footprint does give some certain level of permission. So the weighing up of both those components is part of the assessment.
Thank you. And I just have one final question, which was raised with me, is about, I thought I'd seen in the report, but the objectors map, from recollection, most of the objectors are local neighbours, isn't that correct? They're mostly Kalantina Road and Kuyankut and in the neighbouring area, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I think there was about 4 or 5 on Kuyankut Road, and the others were either on Berkeley Street or
Kalantina.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councillor Bigger, and your foreshadowing a motion is noted. I just noticed Councillor Park's got his light on.
Thank you, Chair. The proposed garden area is 45% of the site. Do we know what the existing garden area is?
I don't know the garden area existing. However, I do know that the the site, I can give you the site coverage if you like. It would be similar for the garden area in this instance. It is about 40, one of them is 48%, and so the proposed is 48%, and the existing is about 46.5%. 49%. So it's about 1 or 2% difference. It was a bit difficult to calculate the existing building footprint because I didn't have the building footprint, but it's roughly around that much. There would be a little bit less garden area in the existing building footprint because the driveway is much larger than the proposed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Park. Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, would the office be able to advise how many lots in that street have 2 dwellings in the same sort of relationship?
There is one other similar style of development, which is about 3 doors to the north of the subject site. There are other unit developments in a tandem format, but the majority, they're the only ones that they're more towards the south and towards the river and all the way to the north. There are similar tandem style developments or multi-unit residential buildings, but this is the second one in the street in a side-by-side formation.
I'll just return to Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bigger has foreshadowed a motion. I am seeking a 10-minute adjournment to prepare an alternative motion in the event that Councillor Bigger's motion fails, and for the information of councillors in considering the adjournment request, it would be somewhere between the officer's recommendation and Councillor Biggart's motion rather. So I move that adjournment.
Notwithstanding that we don't know Councillor Biggar's motion just yet, but
I've spoken with Councillor Biggart.
thank you. I have a second to Councillor Sinfield.
Happy to.
I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Adjournment for 10 minutes. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, I'm in search of a motion to resume standing orders. Councillor Sinfield.
So moved.
Seconded, Councillor Biggart.
Yep.
Put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Make sure we're live. Yes. Yep. So we'll return back to Councillor Biggart. You foreshadowed a motion.
I did, thank you, Chair. And I have an alternative motion that I would like the officers, that's not it quite yet. Oh yeah, there it is, sorry. Key being the word at the end of the first sentence, which is that the Urban Planning Delegated Committee resolved to not support planning permit application, so on and so forth. And then if you scroll up so people can see the bottom of that, please, or scroll down, thank you. So, yeah.
So this is a notice of refusal.
It is, thank you.
Thank you. To assist Councillor Biggart, is there a seconder? Councillor Hollingsworth.
To enable debate, thank you.
Thank you. And is there any opposition on this item? There is opposition. So as the mover, Councillor Biggart, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I do indeed, thank you. So first I want to certainly acknowledge the work of the officers on this proposal. It has not been insignificant. And even though ultimately I disagree with their recommendation, it doesn't negate the value of the work that they've done. And as anyone can see from looking at the list of conditions applied to the plans, including things like the proposed changes to landscaping plans, they're significant. And for me, I do appreciate the conditions. And I feel that while the conditions have gone a long way to improving this application, I still feel, in fact, what it does is it highlights the deficiency of the application in many ways. And I do acknowledge the work of the applicant that was addressed tonight in trying to look at the concerns of the residents and local neighbours ultimately, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate their conciliatory approach, but ultimately our role as council is not about who will live in the building and how they will use it, but the size and the bulk and the impact of this development on the street and the surrounding neighbourhood. And that, for me, is my issue with this application. When I look at, on page, you don't have to look this up, I'll tell you about it, on page 18, the report clearly states, so I'm not questioning this, it says, clearly states the proposal complies with the mandatory requirements relating to building height and garden area. It does. It's not a question about that. I appreciate that on Res Code it ticks all the boxes. That's the objective element of planning. But I think for us, if you think, looking further down that same page, the report states that the objective of the planning scheme right here is to maintain the detached 1 to 2 story scale and spacious suburban character of the area, protect and enhance the area's leafy feel and the garden setting of dwellings, and maintain the fine-grained rhythm of streetscapes and the landscape character of the area. And this is where the subjective element of planning comes into play. I feel like this is where we as councillors add value. This is where we are in contact with the community. We're listening. We're meant to use our judgment about applications, not just say it ticks all the boxes. It complies with what the Res Code says. If that was the case, I think that councillors wouldn't be needed then in this process, that officers could look at whether or not it ticked the boxes and be quite objective about it. But there is a subjective element about this. And for me, that question is, does this house fit in the neighborhood character? Does this application fit? Well, officers have said tonight that they think this street or this element of the street has already transitioned. But for me, I don't think that's true. When I look at the artist's rendering of it, I don't see that this proposal is consistent with the street, although interesting, the officer said the proposal is consistent with the anticipated scale of change within the area. But what is the anticipated scale of change in the area, and who determines it, if not us? Right? On behalf of the residents, is that not our role to determine the anticipated scale of change, determine where these streets are transitioning to? I think this is the role we have to play to determine where our neighborhoods transition, so that in the next 40 years, 50 years, these houses, which will still be here, are they what we want to be here? Are they what our neighborhood, what our residents want to be here? I'm not opposing this application tonight because I don't like how it presents to the street, although I don't like some of the elements of it. It is big and it is imposing, it's bulky. But when I look at the objective of this, of what's the neighborhood character, when I look at that objective, and it says that we are meant to protect and enhance the area's leafy feel and the garden setting of dwellings and maintain the fine-grained rhythm of streetscapes, does this property, does this application really do that? I don't see that it does. I don't see how it achieves what we're meant to be achieving. And I mean, I can't speak for other councillors, but for me, possibly the number one concern I hear raised from residents relates to the loss of open and green spaces, not just in public, but the impact of the built form and the urbanization and the intensity of development, which is increasing our heat island effect and changing the nature of Boroondara, and it's changing the character of it. And if we can't be the ones to impact on that, then nobody can. And so it seems to me with applications like this is where we really need to think, is this the right application? Is this the right direction for our streets and our streetscapes? And I would say for Kooyungkoot Road, no. I encourage my fellow councillors to support my motion and to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Biggar. Noting that there is opposition, do any other councillors seek to speak to this motion? Otherwise, I'll return back to the mover. No further lights are on. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just want to acknowledge all that Councillor Biggar said and completely understand the sentiment. I too have very grave concerns about the application with the bulk and presentation to the streetscape, and I echo what Councillor Biggar has said. I appreciate through debate this evening a lot of the questions and concerns that I have been addressed and answered. And it is a dilemma because we are here to make a determination of does this comply with neighbourhood character and the impacts of the street. And one concern I have is that each application that's been supported, each dwelling that's being built, whether they've been single dwellings or I think there were 2 examples of multi-dwellings, that each one's progressively getting bigger. And whilst this one does provide a reasonable area to the rear of the property to enable vegetation, it's the presentation to the streetscape that presents as more dominant than anything else. It does fill the width of the block and it goes to the maximum height allowance. It is a very bold presence. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I think what the ward councillor is trying to do here is largely the right thing by her community and the Kooyungkoot Road community. I'm concerned that a refusal will potentially lose the significant improvements that the officers have sought to gain through the conditions proposed. I'm a little bit torn with this one, but I certainly appreciate the direction that the ward councillor is trying to go in here. But I think the better position for council to be in, or UPD to be in, is to present something more similar to the officer's recommendation to VCAT so that they can lean upon our position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I thought I'd outline my views. I do understand Councillor Biggar's proposal. I am of the view, I share the view that Councillor Sinfield has articulated, that the officers have achieved some gains, and I think they're important, and I think it's better to lock those in rather than to seek a refusal. And also in relation to neighbourhood character, there's, Councillor Bigg has spoken articulately on one perception, but I also think the officers, I asked the questions about neighbourhood character, and I thought the officers spoke very eloquently, arguing the case as to why it did comply subjectively with neighbourhood character. I won't revisit all the arguments, but I do agree with them. So I think that view can be made, and I support the officers' recommendation, so I won't be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. I'll return, there are no other lights on, so I'll return to our mover just to round out debate.
I don't think I have anything else to say. Thank you.
And noted. Thank you, Councillor Bigger. I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? Trick question, that one. And those against? I declare that motion failed. I'm in search of a new motion. Councillor Park.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to have two bob each way there. Officers have assisted to prepare my motion, which essentially removes the front, the dividing fence at the front of the property in paragraph B, and then subsequently it changes the setbacks slightly. In so doing, I've sought further officer advice about trying to reach the maximum available setbacks without causing a total redesign, and that seems to be the best that can be achieved, and the rationale in trying to get to an accommodation where there doesn't need to be any significant redesign is that hopefully the applicant will see the merit in actually working with council and thereby addressing some of the concerns that have been expressed to us tonight. So it's slight middle ground towards the sentiment expressed by Councillor Bigger.
Thank you, Councillor Park. I believe I've got a second to Councillor Sinfield.
Possibly.
Possibly.
But I have a suggestion for the mover, if you might like to consider two possible changes. The red text that is currently on the screen, I would suggest, should be correctly referenced as clause U, not V. And the other would be to permit a fence, but to a maximum height of something like 1.2 metres to contain a small dog, rather than having no fence at all.
So, Councillor Sinfield, we're just noting a little issue with Word at the moment, but we'll take that as an administrative thing. Can we just scroll up?
I like to make up my own alphabet. I'm not fond of small dogs either. If you're going to have
It might contain the breakfast for your larger dog in their front yard.
If you're going to get a dog, get a real one. I'm not inclined to accept the amendment in respect of the height of that fence. I think it's better deleted because it is about how the property presents to the street. So I'll respectfully decline.
I'm still in search of a seconder to that motion.
Happy to second it.
You've given way. So we have a seconder in Councillor Sinfield. To assist Councillor Park, is there any opposition? There is there is a little bit of opposition tonight, Councillor Park. So I'll hand to you as the mover.
I'm a man of few words, so I'll hear the objections.
Thank you. So do any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Franco.
My objection is with the amendments to the officer's recommendation. In voting against Councillor Park's motion, it shouldn't be interpreted that I oppose. I mean, I'd support this if the officer's recommendation didn't get up, but if Councillor Park's motion fails, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. There appears to be no other lights on Councillor Park, so on that basis, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? I declare that motion is carried. Congratulations, Councillor Park. Done.
It's a Pyrrhic victory. I'd rather it not get through at all.
Well, we made our way through it, which is good. Thank you, Councillor. So we'll move on to item 4, general business. Are there any items of general business? None. Urgent business? No items of urgent business. Are there any items of confidential business? There being none, noting that the time on the clock is a little bit incorrect, I believe the meeting is closed at 8:17 p.m. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, gallery.